All right, I'm going to get started. So I will take responsibility for being in this cavernous room. I wanted a room that was big enough that we could fit everybody who is participating in PhoneLab, just in case everybody came. I didn't figure that everybody would come, but just in case. So that's why we're in this large room. But it's really exciting for me to see the people who are here, right? Because I don't get a chance to meet very many of you. My name is Geoffrey Challen. I'm the director of the PhoneLab and the PI on the project. To me and my students, I think sometimes, PhoneLab is really sort of an abstraction, right? But having you guys in front of me, it's sort of the first time that I've been able to see a large number of PhoneLab participants in one space, especially over here near the aisle, where you guys. So that's great. It's really exciting. So what we're going to do today, our meeting has two parts. I'll throw the agenda up here. So for about the next 20 minutes, we wanted to have just a private meeting with people who are current participants to give you guys a chance to learn a little bit about what we've been learning about your smartphone usage and how your data has been helping us learn more about these devices and improve the smartphones that you guys are using. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to describe several of the experiments that have been going on the testbed and a little bit about what we've learned. Given the size of the group, I would love to make this as interactive as possible. So if you guys have questions, please just yell, scream, raise your hand, whatever works, and we'll talk about things. But the goal for the first half an hour at least, is to talk about some of the experiments we've been doing. At 5 o'clock, we're going to have a short break and eat the pizza that is getting cold over here. Fortunately, it got here a little bit early. We also have a couple of the devices that we're going to hand out next year down here for you guys to sort of play with, so you can see what is in store if you choose to continue to participate in PhoneLab. The Nexus 5 phones are really nice. Give me one. Yeah, so these are pretty cool. So we have some down here for you guys to look at. In the second half of our program, what we're going to do is Malik Dave, our testbed administrator, who many of you guys have met, he's going to talk about what we're going to do next year on PhoneLab. There's a few small changes. We'll talk a little bit about the device, about some improvements to Sprint service. And at that point, at about 5:20 or so, we're just going to throw the meeting open for questions addressed to me, to Malik. We also have John Franke here, our Sprint representative. So he's going to be able to answer some questions about that you might have about service or other things, right? And at that point, it'll just be we'll have an open floor. So if you guys have issues or questions, please let us know. All right. So PhoneLab is a big project. There are a lot of people involved. There's 5 faculty members who are leading the project together, including myself, Chunmeng Chow, who's here, Murat Demirbas, Tevfik Koshar, and Steve Koh, who are not. And then we have a really talented and wonderful group of students that works on the project, including Jinghao Xu, who's here. What's that? Cameraman. The cameraman, yeah. He's also a fantastic cameraman, among his other talents. Taeyeon Ki is also here. Where did he go? He's way in the back. Carl Nestle is here, and then some of the other people on the board. But probably the most important person for me to introduce, although someone I don't really need to introduce, is Malik Dave, our testbed administrator. How many of you guys have met Malik already? Yeah, yeah. And so he's awesome, right? Malik's super helpful, super friendly, way more helpful and friendly than I am, right? So he's been a really blessing to have on our team. So in general, let me talk first about what we're trying to do with PhoneLab, the PhoneLab testing, right? There's a couple of different thrusts of the research that we're trying to do, right? One is we're trying to fix problems with these devices, right? How many of you guys are completely 100% satisfied with your smartphone? Yeah, I didn't think so, right? So there are problems, right? And we know you're 100%? Oh, right, yeah, okay. So we're running at about 3%, right? We'd like to boost that number up a little bit. So we're doing research to try to address some common issues, right? Battery lifetime, right? How many people are satisfied with their battery life? Okay, now we're up to like 5-6%, right? So that's one of the issues we've looked at storage limitations on these devices, security and privacy threats that you guys are opening yourselves up to by using a smartphone. So we've been doing research in these areas. We're also trying to better understand smartphone users, right? So you guys are a really interesting population, and it's great to have a really good and diverse group of participants. For a lot of you, I think this was potentially the first smartphone that you've used. So it was really interesting to see you transition to these new devices. You know, these smartphones have taken off really quickly, but we still don't really understand necessarily how people use them and the differences in how people use them. And finally, we're trying to sort of drive innovative new features, right? So we want to do new sort of cutting-edge research that sort of expands the type of things that are possible using these devices, particularly given the fact that, you know, 5 years from now, the country is going to be blanketed by people who have these types of phones, right? And this is a really exciting system for us to try to understand how to use, right? There's a lot of things we can learn. So the projects that I'm going to talk about today sort of, you know, fall into one of these three categories. But before I start talking about the specifics of the research, I actually want to give you guys a little bit of an overview into the research process that we use on PhoneLab, because really all you guys see from your perspective as participants is us sending you emails saying, please install this app, right? Or please join this experiment. But there's several things that go on beforehand that I just want to sort of inform you guys of, that steps that we're taking to try to make the testbed safer, to make it more effective, and to make sure that we're making the best use of your time and your energy, right? So, you know, here's your view of the system, but there's a bunch that goes on up here, right? So the first thing that happens when researchers come to us and want to do experiments on the testbed is we ask them to tell us something about what they want to do, right? What sort of data are they going to collect? What sort of things are they trying to learn or understand about smartphone usage? And in some cases, their experiment isn't really suitable for the testbed. We've had companies that have approached us and want to do research. That's not something that we do. We've had people who want to do research that would be better done in other ways. So, you know, there's a little bit of discussion here that we start about what it is that people are trying to accomplish, right? If we think that their experiment is a good fit for the testbed, then there's two things that go on in parallel at that point, right? One is that we ask them to get their experiment approved by the appropriate human subjects review body, right? Most of the experiments, I should say most, I think all the experiments we've run so far by external institutions have been US universities. And so at US universities, there's a common university structure called the Institutional Review Board that is in charge of reviewing these types of experiments. And the Institutional Review Board actually reviews all sorts of things, right? So this is a mechanism that we're using to make sure that testbed research done on PhoneLab is safe, but it's not something that we made up. It's not something that's new. It's been used for decades to examine and approve all sorts of different types of research, right? So we require that experimenters have their experiments approved by the IRB, and they provide us proof of that. In parallel, the group of PhoneLab developers, yeah?
I think I wanted to add that, you know, they actually address a lot of the privacy security issues.
Right, exactly.
So basically, you know, if IRB, I mean, they succeeded in passing that review, that means they are not collecting your personal data and you know, use the data for, you know, other purposes.
Right, so the IRBs are quite experienced at examining these types of experiments, right? And so, you know, we're relying on them and utilizing them so that we don't have to. So you're not relying on us, right? We rely on people who do this sort of professionally, right? People who do this for a living, and the institutional reputation is bound up in the ability of these IRBs to function effectively. At the same time, so I forgot to point this out. So one of the things I want you guys to know is that in computer science, we have a term that's called eating your own dog food. Has anyone ever heard this? What it means is that you are using the product that you're asking somebody else to use, right? So if you work at Microsoft, you run Windows, right? You're eating your own dog food. If there's a problem with Windows, and actually you run the newest version of Windows, right? Because if there's a problem with it, then you suffer first. Right? You eat it first before you feed it to somebody else. I don't know why it has to be dog food. It could be eating your own cookie, right? That's a nicer way of saying it, but we say dog food for some reason. So everybody on the PhoneLab team, including myself and all my students, we are all also PhoneLab participants, right? So we use the same phones, we provided the same experiments, and we have some of the same problems that you guys have with your phones. We actually do a little bit more testing before experiments get to the test bed. So the first thing that happens is that we run those experiments locally. We test them to make sure that they don't, you know, completely drain your battery, that they don't crash all the time. And so there's usually some dialogue that goes on here between the people who are doing experiments saying, yeah, this doesn't work very well, can you fix these problems, right? So we try to make sure that we're the people who get to experience these sort of buggy experiments and you guys aren't, right? So that's the goal. It doesn't always work perfectly, I'm not gonna claim that, but we are sort of a buffer here between the experimenters and their lousy experiments and you guys, right? And then finally, at that point, once the experiment's been tested and we have some proof that an institutional review board has signed off on the experiment, that's the point at which we ask you guys to participate, right? So there's we're trying to take some steps here to make your experience safer and more productive. Right? Any questions about this before I go on? I think this is pretty important and sort of good for us to talk about. Yeah, I don't need to go into that. All right, so let me talk about, I'm breaking down the experiments I'm going to discuss into two categories. So obviously, me and my students and other faculty members here use PhoneLab to do research at UB. All of the research we do, just to be clear, is approved by UB's IRB. We don't have any special loopholes for ourselves. We go through the same procedures that other experimenters go through to use the testbed. So let me talk about a couple of different things we've done. Some of these experiments you guys may have joined, right? So we did some work on looking for parking spots on campus, which is kind of a fun project. I'll talk about that in a minute. We also distributed a usage monitoring experiment, and the data from that experiment has been used to study a couple of different things, right? One is energy management, and we've also been looking at using it to observe the health of the campus Wi-Fi networks, which is kind of fun. And finally, there's a group here that Chun Ming's been leading that's actually looking at using human contact between people on the testbed to try to better understand flu propagation, right? And I don't know a huge amount.
Hopefully, once we collected enough data, we understood how the flu propagates. We can also give you kind of useful advice. They don't go to this place, these days. So don't go see this friend of yours, right? Because he's sick.
Right.
So really, during the winter season.
Or how about this? Don't come to work. Don't come to work today. Right? So we will give you an app that'll tell you to stay home from work, right? Because either you will get someone sick or you will get sick. All right. So let me talk a little bit about the parking lot experiment, because I think a number of people actually joined this one. So the goal here was, how many people have a hard time finding a parking spot on campus? Yeah, see, I can see the students and me putting our hands up, right? Because we're the people that show up at like 11 a.m. When I used to teach at 9 a.m., I never had a hard time finding a parking spot, right? It's right next to the building. So,
you leave for lunch,
oh yeah,
and then you try to come back.
You're done.
Yeah.
Don't leave for lunch. That's the trick. And never leave campus until you're ready to go home forever. Yeah, so this is kind of a pain, right? And you see people circling around the lots, and the reason for this is if you think about it, it's very hard to search parking lots, right? It's very difficult to see where spots are, right? You're down. Unless maybe you have one of those huge vehicles that's way up on stilts or something, right? In which case you're okay. But for the rest of us in our normal-sized vehicles, it's very hard to see where there are spots in the lot. And so what we thought is, can we use the fact that a lot of us are carrying around these smartphones to monitor parking lots on campus and be able to predict where there are spots available, right? And the way we did this is we said, and the other thing we didn't really want to do is we didn't want to ask you guys every time you parked or every time you left to push some button, right? How many people would remember to do that every time? Yeah, me neither, right? So instead what we said is, can we do some inference based on your activity, right? So if we see you, for example, and there are some nice tools on Android that allow us to determine, using some of the Android sensors, what your activity is. So for example, the device will tell us the person is walking, right? Or the person is driving, right? They use the accelerometer on the phone to determine this. If you stop walking and start driving in an area that we know to be a parking lot, what just happened? It's likely that you just got into your car and left, right? And if you stop driving and start walking in an area that we know to be a parking lot near campus, it's likely that you just parked, right? And so by using these events that we're able to collect from you and feeding them into a model that tries to account for the fact that not everybody is using our app, what we try to do is make predictions about the probability that there's a spot available on a particular lot, right? And we ran an experiment for a couple of months. We used cameras. We put up some cameras with IRB permission in the building to observe several of the lots that we could see nearby, so that we would know how many spots were actually available, right? It's great to make a prediction. It's nice also to know whether your prediction was right or not. Some of my students actually went by hand through picture after picture after picture, coding how many spots were available, right? It's pretty tedious, but they did it.
They didn't look at the license plate.
They didn't, yeah, whatever. Well, come on. If you had to go through 1,000 photos, would you be looking at license plates? It's like, yes, no, right? So yeah, they did it quickly. And what we found, which is pretty cool, is that even if we only have a small number of people who are using this app, we can actually make fairly accurate predictions about the availability of parking spots, right? And there's limitations to this, but we thought this was a pretty exciting project, and this is a pretty cool result, right? This is one way that we've been using your PhoneLab data. So the next experiment I'll talk about internally was a pretty broad-based experiment that a number of PhoneLab users participated in that collected a lot of different information about how you use your phone. They collected information about the Wi-Fi access points that you connect to and the Wi-Fi access points that you see. It collected information about your battery levels. And we've used this to support a couple of different experiments, right? I want to talk about just two of them today, right? One is energy management, which I think is something that a lot of you guys would appreciate if we could improve. And the second is looking at observing network behavior on campus, right? So in a nutshell, what we found out with energy management was that there's a huge amount of diversity in the test bed with how you guys use your phones. So this is a graph showing how much energy normalized to, I think this is per hour, different users on the test bed use. And when we saw this graph, we thought, there's no way that there can be this much variation, right? I mean, some of you guys are down here, in the 100 range, and some of you guys are up here in the 1,000 range. So that's a factor of 10, right? And the problem here is that a lot of the ideas that people have for improving smartphone energy management assume that all of you guys have the same expectations about how long you want your phone to last, right? But what we found out is some people, how many people have a charger at their desk? How many people always remember to use that charger? Yeah. How many people charge every night, right? How many people expect their phone to last now for 24 hours on a single charge? Yeah, see? So there are differences in expectations, right? So if we try to create a solution that works well for a certain group of users, we're not going to have a solution that works well for all users, right? So something we're actually going to, so what we've decided is there really isn't there's no such thing as the smartphone energy management problem. There's a lot of different types of problems because there's a lot of different types of smartphone users with different expectations, with different charging patterns. Some of you guys play games that consume huge amounts of energy, others don't, right? And so that leads to all this variation that we've observed, right? And so what we're doing, and I won't sort of get into too many of the details for next year, is we're going to actually try to deploy an Android platform next year that's going to give you guys more fine-grained control over how energy is managed on your device. Right? So this is something that we're going to experiment with in the fall. This is a feature that you will only find on PhoneLab, nowhere else. I don't know how well it's going to work, but we're going to give it a shot. Right? And the idea is that for some of you guys that want your phone to last all day, there'll be a setting for that. For others who play a lot of games and are charging every 2 hours at their desk, we'll have settings for that as well. Right? So we're trying to tailor how energy is used on the device more personally to your own habits. All right, so the last project I'll talk about briefly is this idea of using smartphones on campus to observe wireless networks. So UB is covered with wireless access points. We got a complete list of access points from CIT. How many were on there? Like 2,000? 2,500, right? So on North Campus and South Campus, which are somewhat compact areas, there's 2,500 wireless access points that exist to provide you guys wireless coverage, right? The problem is, depending on how those access points are deployed, you can have places where two access points are actually colliding with each other, right? They're causing interference. And that interference can be very difficult for the access point itself to observe. So what we've been doing is we've been collecting some of the information provided by your phones to try to help CIT debug their campus networks and find places where there are collisions. Ideally, what we'd be able to do is, for example, let's say you're sitting here minding your own business, watching some sort of streaming video online, and suddenly this other person comes and starts interfering with your connection, right? And so, the video gets all blurry and it starts you see the wheel come out, What we'd like your phone, so let's say you're using your laptop and your phone's nearby. The phone might be able to actually suggest to your laptop that your laptop and the access point move to a different channel that's less congested, right? And so that would allow you to continue to stream content at the same rate, right? So this is another thing that we've been doing using your data. All right, any questions about the internal experiments that we've run? Let's see how I'm doing on time, too.
The one you just mentioned?
Sure.
No idea. Curiosity, did you find any rogue wireless access points or ones that were?
Yeah, we found, we've just started looking at this data, but we found thousands of rogue access points. Yeah, yeah. At least a couple of them belong to me. I will pony up and say that I have some. But how many did we find? 10,000? 7,000. Right. 7,000 rogue access points on campus. I don't know how many of those are real. Some of them might be things like Apple TVs or your device when it's tethering. But a lot of them are probably rogue people like me who have a router on their desk because they don't think that they get very good wireless coverage. But yeah, we're talking with CIT about this. They're very concerned with rogue access points. And this is something that will be able to help them. So just for those of you that don't know, rogue access points are access points that are on campus that are competing for the same spectrum with the UB access points, but are actually not run by UB. And this frustrates the network people to no end, right? They get very angry when they start talking about these, right? Because it's ruining the performance of their network, but they don't really have any control over it, right? Rogue access points. It makes it sound very scary. Yeah. Exactly, right? And my suspicion is that a lot of those rogue access points are in dorms and they're set up by students. Right? I know, again, I ran one in college and I'm sure it made somebody mad. All right, so.
We're not going to report to CIT who did this stuff. So
yeah. Now we're going to use that data to target drone strikes on the rogue access points. No. But we are interested in how many of those access points CIT sees versus the ones that we see. All right, so let me talk briefly about some of the external experiments that are going on PhoneLab. Unfortunately, I don't know as much about these because I'm not doing the research, and so I can't go into depth. But we have had some external usage of the testbed, and we're very excited about that. This is one of the things our goals in establishing PhoneLab was to allow the data that you guys are providing to enable not only smartphone experimentation here at UB, because me and my group, there's only so many experiments we can run, but also experimentation at other schools as well, right? Okay, so I'm going to talk about two of them, right? So one is an experiment about characterizing privacy threats that was run by the University of Michigan, and the second one is an experiment looking at how to build the next generation internet that's designed for mobile access, which is the majority of internet access today is. And that was run by the University of Massachusetts Amherst, UMass Amherst. All right, so RTCLMON, this was the name of the experiment that some of you guys joined. It collects information about your app usage patterns. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to determine if something about your usage of an app can reveal other things about you, right? So for example, if there's an app that you only use when you're at home, then if I know that you're using that app, I can probably guess that you're at home, right? So we got some information from the University of Michigan researchers about what they discovered from the data that they collected on the testbed. They said that users tend to invoke a very small set of apps frequently, which we knew, and the rest of apps very rarely, right? So there's a small number of apps you use very much, and there's a large number of apps that you don't use that much at all. Right? How many people feel like they're characterized as their app usage patterns? It's pretty good, right? There's that app that it's like, how many times do you really need to use Shazam, right? I mean, it's handy from time to time, right? But not all the time. And one of the things they found too was that 98% of the app sessions happen when the users are visiting the same place, right? So there's a fair amount of correlation between usage of a particular app and being in a particular location, which is what they were looking for. The second experiment, which was from UMass Amherst, was called Nomad Log. Nomad Log is designed to try to enable sort of next generation mobile internet. And what they're looking at is sort of the relationship between geographic location and network location. And I don't really have a great way of explaining what network location is, except to say that it has to do with what part of the internet you're connecting to, right? And how that relates to where you are. And this is designed to, we didn't really get a lot of information about what they've done with this data, but this is designed to sort of help design the next generation of the internet to be more mobility friendly. So as I said before, one of the cool things we're really excited about with next year, and Malik's about to talk more about next year, that we're going to do is we're going to release our PhoneLab phones to you with some added features that are PhoneLab only. Right? So these are experimental features. They're things that we think are useful enough that you guys will enjoy using, but they're not necessarily things that, well, I shouldn't say that. They're things that you won't find anywhere else, right? One is that the tool to manage your battery lifetime, which I mentioned earlier. We're also developing a next generation approach to, or we want to deploy an approach to allowing you to use multiple network interfaces simultaneously. So for example, John's going to talk a little bit when he comes up here about Sprint's 4G rollout, which has been proceeding over the last year. 4G actually has really, really fast connection speeds, which some of you guys may already be enjoying. If you combine 4G with Wi-Fi, then you can get even faster speeds, right? So how do you do that with preserving the way that existing apps work, right? And then throughout the summer, we're also going to be approaching other external research groups and looking for new ideas of new features that we can include for next year's build. So we'll keep you up to date on this as it progresses. All right, I'm finished. I think I'm a little over time. Any questions for me before we break? Yeah.
So I had raised a question with y'all before, and I'm wondering for this next iteration, will you be addressing, for us who are participating, trying to figure out when we wish, what is our status? Have we participated enough?
Yeah.
Do you expect more? I want to see the data that I have participated in, which I have not requested. I know that we can, but it would be better if it was just there letting look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is something that we have, I admit we've been behind schedule on. We are planning over the summer to improve the portal that you guys have a chance to use. We want you to be able to see exactly your status, right? You know, how much data you've contributed to each app, right? And also provide more control over what data you are contributing to various apps, right? So that is something that has been on our list of things to do, right? It's not something that you know, we never had wanted to provide, and all I can say is that we haven't accomplished it yet, right? Which I will take responsibility for. Yeah.
This will probably come up later in the presentation, but if we continue participating, are we going to keep the same phone we have, or?
No. New phones. Everybody gets a new phone. Yeah.
Phone.
Yeah. Malik, can we help people transfer their settings over?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we will help you transfer your apps and settings and data from the old phone. But yeah, everybody next year will be on the Nexus 5.
No,
Phone number will be the same. Yeah. What's going to happen to the old phones? That's a great question, actually. So I have another research interest I didn't talk about, but we are actually actively trying to find ways to reuse old smartphones. So we have several research projects going on right now. You guys may hear about one of them over the summer. So with the first year's phones, right, about 200 of them, we've been looking at a variety of different things. We've been looking at putting them outside to sense climate, right? We've been looking at putting them inside as little storage devices where you could back up files. But the thing we're going to try over the summer is we're actually going to we're going to set them up as navigation devices for you to use in your car, right? So it'll essentially look like a phone, but it'll act like just a single purpose GPS navigation unit. However, as you're using it, it's also going to be collecting some other information about what you're doing. Of course, that's what we do, right? So but you know, again, it's the same thing. I mean, you get the free navigation device out of it. We get some information about your vehicular mobility patterns, right, which we're pretty curious about. But yeah, if you have ideas about what to do with these old devices, please talk to us, because I mean, this is a big problem, right? I mean, and it's only going to get worse as smartphones come out and as people continue to get rid of them. So we are really interested in figuring out ways to reuse old phones. And again, if you have ideas, come talk to us. But right now, they sit in a locker while we brainstorm. Right. Any other great questions? Any other questions? Yeah.
How many people participated?
This year we had 288 participants signed up. And next year, Malik's going to talk about this when he gives his presentation, but next year we're hoping to grow the size of the testbed even more, right? And actually next year we have really no limit as to how large the testbed can get. And we'll talk about why that is, right? But if you guys have friends that you think this would be a great fit for, please invite them to join. Yeah?
I have a question about how much was picked for each experiment. Were all experiments open to everyone, or did you pick a segment?
Every experiment has been open to everybody so far, right? If we get to the point where we think we're big enough that we should start, maybe filtering or targeting people, we'll certainly let you know that. I would love to have that problem, right? Like, we have 10,000 people signed up, and we have to pick little groups. That'd be sweet, But we're a long way from that yet.
Some people ask them not to use the Pocket Parker if they were in South Campus because that would not be applicable.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like that. But as far as I know, I mean, usually we're trying to get as many people signed up for an experiment as possible. Right. Good question. Any other questions before we? Yeah. Mm-hmm. To yeah, so
You're not a current participant, right?
yeah, we will. So we're gonna in about 10 minutes. We're gonna go through next year. So we can we come back to your? I'm sorry, people have been coming in. I think I'm over time. I don't have a clock. 6 minutes. Yeah. So for people who just came in, we're gonna take a break. The phones that we're using next year are right here. If you guys want to come down, check them out. We have a lot of pizza. Some of it's here, some of it's there for some reason. But you know, pick your side and hope there's something you like in that corner. And then in about 10 minutes, Malik will talk about next year.
There's another question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You mentioned Parker.
Yeah.
I downloaded it. I look at it once in a while. I don't use it because I'm on South Campus. Does that affect your data?
No. No.
I did come up once. I think it showed up to the student union a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right now it shows I'm in this building.
The location is not always perfect. Yeah. But we.
I don't want to interfere with anything.
No, we've been able to filter out data from people who are not on the right campus. So. All right, so let's have pizza. Check out the phones. We'll start up again in about 10 minutes. Thank you for coming.